The rifle slipped from Ayana's trembling hands, clattering against the wooden porch as Judge Ahote's body crumpled at her feet. Blood pooled beneath his expensive coat, mixing with the mountain dust that had settled on her white wedding dress. This wasn't supposed to be how her wedding day ended. Dakota's boots thundered across the clearing, his massive frame blocking out the setting sun as he reached for her. "Sweet Jesus, what happened here?" His voice cracked like breaking timber, eyes wide with disbelief as he took in the scene. His 18-year-old bride standing over her own father's corpse. The scent of gunpowder hung heavy in the Nevada air, mixing with the metallic smell of blood and the wild flower bouquet still clutched in Ayana's other hand. She remembered picking those flowers just hours ago, dreaming of a future that now lay shattered like her father's chest. "Get inside." "Now." Dakota's command was gentle despite the urgency, his calloused hands guiding her away from the body. Who would believe a mountain man's word against a judge's reputation? And how long before the sheriff came looking for answers they couldn't give? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 7 months earlier, when the desert winds still carried the promise of spring and Silver Creek buzzed with silver fever, Ayana White Crow believed her biggest worry was choosing between suitors at the church social. She was 18, educated beyond most women in the Nevada territory, and blessed with her late mother's striking beauty, raven black hair that caught sunlight like silk, and eyes the color of storm clouds that could read Latin as easily as they could read a man's intentions. Her father, Judge Ahote White Crow, ruled their modest household with the same iron fist he used in his courtroom. Half Lakota himself, he'd married Ayana's white mother for political advantage, then buried his heritage beneath expensive suits and territorial ambitions. When consumption claimed his wife during Ayana's birth, he'd raised his daughter like a prized possession, polished, educated, and completely under his control. "You'll marry well," he'd tell her over breakfast, eyes scanning the territorial newspaper for mentions of his judicial decisions. "A senator's wife, perhaps, someone who'll advance our family's standing." He never said my standing, but Ayana understood. Everything in Judge White Crow's world served his hunger for power. 300 miles north, in a cabin nestled between towering ponderosa pines, Dakota Bearfighter lived a life that couldn't have been more different. At 32, he was known throughout the territory as a mountain man who traded furs and spoke little. What folks didn't know was that behind his weathered exterior lived a broken physician who'd abandoned medicine after watching smallpox claim his wife Kachina and infant daughter 3 winters past. The cabin still held reminders of his lost family, a child's moccasins by the hearth, Kachina's beadwork hanging from the rafters like prayer flags. Dakota had built this place for them, carved every beam with his own hands, dreaming of raising children who'd run wild through these mountains. Now the silence echoed with memories that cut deeper than any blade. Few knew that Dr. Thomas Bearfighter owned the richest silver strike in Nevada territory, hidden deep in Ponderosa Canyon. Fewer still knew he'd rather die than return to a world that had taken everything he loved. The mountain had become his monastery, loneliness his penance for failing to save those who mattered most. Meanwhile, in Silver Creek's white-steepled church, Pastor Elon Hayes preached salvation while harboring sins that would damn lesser men. His son Chayton, 22 and blessed with golden hair and a silver tongue, had learned early that his father's position protected him from consequences. Young women throughout the territory had discovered too late that beneath Chayton's charming smile lurked a predator who took what he wanted and disappeared behind his family's reputation. None of them, not Ayana with her dreams, Dakota with his grief, or the Hayes men with their secrets, could have imagined how their lives would collide in ways that would test the very foundations of love, justice, and redemption in the unforgiving landscape of the American frontier. The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of Silver Creek's modest church, casting rainbow fragments across the wooden pews where Ayanna Whitecrow sat with hands folded over her secret. 3 months had passed since that stolen evening with Chayton Hayes behind the schoolhouse. 3 months of morning sickness disguised as delicate constitution, 3 months of letting out her dresses and praying to whatever gods might listen that her shame wouldn't show. The hymnal trembled in her grip as Pastor Alan Hayes's voice boomed from the pulpit about the wages of sin. Beside her, Judge Whitecrow sat rigid as carved stone, his territorial judge's badge catching the light like a warning. Ayanna tried to focus on the sermon, tried to ignore the way Chayton's golden head gleamed in the front pew, tried to forget how he'd whispered promises of marriage under the cottonwood trees, while his hands roamed places no decent girl should allow. "The Lord sees all transgressions," Pastor Hayes declared, his pale eyes seeming to bore directly into Ayanna's soul. "He knows the hearts of the wicked, the lusts of the flesh that lead to damnation." The irony wasn't lost on her that the man preaching about sin had raised the very devil who'd stolen her innocence. When the dizzy spell hit, Ayanna gripped the pew in front of her, knuckles white against the aged wood. The church tilted sideways, voices became distant echoes, and before she could excuse herself properly, her world went black. She crumpled to the floor with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent sanctuary like a gunshot. Mrs. Henderson's screech pierced the air as congregation members rushed forward. Judge Whitecrow knelt beside his daughter, his face a mask of concern that didn't quite hide the calculation in his dark eyes. When Dr. Morrison arrived and whispered his diagnosis into the judge's ear, every person in that church watched Ahote Whitecrow's expression transform from worry to thunderous rage. "Everyone out!" the judge commanded, his voice carrying the authority of territorial law. "Now!" The sanctuary emptied like water through a broken dam, leaving only the Whitecrow family, the Hayes family, and the terrible weight of exposed sin. Ayanna struggled to sit up, her head still spinning, but her father's iron grip on her shoulder kept her firmly planted on the floor where her shame belonged. "You will name him." Judge Whitecrow's voice was deadly quiet, the kind of calm that preceded frontier justice. "You will name the man who did this, and he will marry you today." Ayanna's eyes found Chayton's across the space between pews. For a heartbeat, she saw something that might have been love, might have been regret. Then his expression shuddered, and she watched the boy who'd sworn to love her forever become a stranger wearing Chayton's face. "I've never touched her," Chayton declared, his voice steady as Sunday morning. "Sir, I swear on my mother's grave, I've never been alone with your daughter. She must be trying to trap me into marriage because of my family's position." The words hit Ayanna like physical blows. Pastor Hayes nodded gravely, placing a protective hand on his son's shoulder. "My boy speaks truth, Judge. He's been with me every evening this summer helping with church business. Perhaps your daughter has been meeting with someone else, someone she's too ashamed to name." Judge Whitecrow's grip tightened until Ayanna gasped. In his eyes, she saw not a father's love, but a politician's cold calculation. Her pregnancy wasn't a grandchild to cherish. It was a scandal that could destroy his ambitions for territorial governor. "Get up," he commanded, hauling her to her feet with bruising force. "We're going home, now." The ride back to their house passed in suffocating silence. Judge Whitecrow's knuckles were white on the buggy reins, his jaw working like he was chewing words too bitter to swallow. Ayanna sat beside him, one hand protectively cradling her still flat belly, watching the desert landscape blur past through tears she refused to let fall. At home, behind closed doors, the explosion came. Judge Whitecrow's hand cracked across her cheek with enough force to snap her head sideways, leaving a red handprint that burned like shame itself. 3 months, he snarled, pacing their small parlor like a caged wolf. 3 months you've been carrying this bastard, lying to me every day. Do you have any idea what this will do to my career? To our family name? Ayanna touched her stinging cheek, tasting blood where her teeth had cut her lip. Papa, you'll marry, he cut her off, his decision already made. There's a man up in the mountains, owes me a considerable debt. Lives alone, keeps to himself. Perfect for damaged goods like you. His smile was sharp as a blade. Dakota Bearfighter, half-breed mountain man, who'll be grateful for any wife, even a ruined one. The wagon wheels carved deep ruts in the mountain trail as Judge Whitecrow drove his daughter toward what he called her new life, and what Ayanna knew was exile. 6 days had passed since the church incident. 6 days of cold silences and hasty preparations. 6 days of watching her father transform from disappointed parent to calculating politician. Now, with her few belongings packed in a single trunk behind her, Ayanna clutched the wagon seat as they climbed higher into the Nevada mountains, each turn taking her further from everything she'd ever known. "Remember what I told you?" Judge Whitecrow's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "You're grateful for this opportunity. Dakota Bearfighter is doing our family a considerable favor by taking you off our hands. Any man willing to marry a pregnant woman deserves respect, not complaints." Ayanna bit back the words burning in her throat. Respect. Was that what they called selling your daughter like livestock to settle a debt? She pressed one hand to her belly, where the child grew steadily beneath her black traveling dress, the same dress she'd worn to her mother's funeral. It seemed fitting somehow. The cabin appeared through the ponderosa pines like something from a dream, or a nightmare. Larger than she'd expected, built from massive logs that spoke of serious intention to stay, smoke curling from a stone chimney that suggested comfort within. For a moment hope flickered in Ayanna's chest. Perhaps this wouldn't be the prison sentence she'd imagined. Then Dakota Bearfighter stepped onto the porch, and her breath caught. He was enormous. Not just tall, but broad across the shoulders in a way that spoke of years hauling timber and hunting wild game. His black hair hung loose past his shoulders, and his skin bore the deep tan of a man who lived under open sky. When he moved down the porch steps, there was something predatory in his grace, like a wolf studying strangers in his territory. But it was his eyes that made Ayanna's stomach clench with fear. Dark as a winter storm and just as cold, they swept over her with the same expression she'd seen men use when evaluating horses at market. No warmth, no welcome, just assessment. "This her?" Dakota's voice was gravelly from disuse, barely above a grunt. Judge Whitecrow climbed down from the wagon with forced cheer. "Dakota, my friend." "Yes, this is Ayanna. As I mentioned in my letter, she's eager to begin her new life up here in God's country." Eager. Ayanna almost laughed at the bitter irony. She remained seated in the wagon, unable to make her legs move, watching this mountain man who was supposed to become her husband examine her like she was merchandise he wasn't sure he wanted. "Get down," Dakota commanded, not rudely, but with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Let me see what I'm getting." The words stung like a slap, but Ayanna forced herself to climb down from the wagon with as much dignity as she could manage. She stood straight-backed in the mountain clearing, chin lifted despite the fear crawling up her spine. If she was going to be inspected like cattle, she'd at least maintain her pride. Dakota circled her slowly, his moccasined feet silent on the pine needles. When he stopped in front of her, his dark eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. She didn't. If this was to be her life, she wouldn't begin it by showing weakness. "How far along?" he asked bluntly. Judge Whitcrow coughed. 3 months, give or take. Nothing that should interfere with domestic duties. Heat flamed across Ayanna's cheeks at her father's crude implication, but Dakota's expression didn't change. If anything, something flickered behind his eyes, surprise, maybe, or recognition. He reached toward her face, and Ayanna flinched despite herself. His hand stopped midway to her cheek. For a long moment they stared at each other, this mountain stranger and the judge's disgraced daughter, while some wordless communication passed between them. When Dakota finally spoke, his voice was softer than before. "She looks like someone I used to know." Judge Whitcrow's smile was sharp with satisfaction. "Excellent. I told you she was a beauty despite her circumstances. Now, about our arrangement." "Inside," Dakota cut him off, gesturing toward the cabin. "We'll discuss terms privately." Ayanna was left standing beside the wagon while the two men disappeared into her new home. Through the open door she caught fragments of their conversation, mentions of debts and favors, of silver claims and territorial politics. Her father's voice carried the oily charm he used when negotiating deals, while Dakota's responses were terse, practical. She studied the clearing that would now be her world. Tall pines surrounded the cabin like sentinels, their branches whispering secrets in the mountain wind. A stream sparkled somewhere nearby, its music mixing with the call of unknown birds. Beautiful, yes, but isolated. No neighbors within miles, no one to hear if she screamed. When the men emerged 20 minutes later, Judge Whitcrow wore the satisfied expression of someone who'd gotten exactly what he wanted. Dakota's face remained unreadable as carved granite. "It's settled then," her father announced, hauling her trunk from the wagon with unseemly haste. "Ayanna, you'll be married tomorrow morning. I'll perform the ceremony myself before I head back to town." "Tomorrow?" The word escaped before she could stop it. Judge Whitcrow's eyes hardened. "Yes, tomorrow. No sense dragging this out longer than necessary." He lowered his voice so only she could hear. "You'll do your duty as a wife, keep your mouth shut about family business, and if you're very lucky, this man won't beat you more than you deserve." As her father climbed back onto his wagon, Ayanna felt the last threads connecting her to her old life snap like broken violin strings. The wagon wheels began their descent down the mountain trail, taking Judge Whitcrow back to his political ambitions and leaving his daughter with a stranger who owned her future. Dakota stood beside her, watching the wagon disappear between the trees. When the sound of wheels faded completely, he turned to face his soon-to-be bride. "You can have the cabin tonight," he said quietly. "I'll sleep in the barn. Tomorrow, after the ceremony, we'll figure out how this is going to work." The wedding ceremony lasted exactly 7 minutes. Judge Whitcrow performed it on the cabin's front porch with all the warmth of a business transaction, his territorial authority making legal what felt utterly wrong to Ayanna's heart. She wore the same black dress from the journey, while Dakota had donned a clean buckskin shirt that made his shoulders appear even broader. When her father pronounced them husband and wife, neither bride nor groom moved to kiss. They simply stared at each other across an emotional chasm that seemed wider than the Nevada desert. "Well then," Judge Whitcrow said, snapping his Bible shut with satisfaction, "that's done. I'll be heading back to town now." He kissed Ayanna's forehead with perfunctory affection, whispered, "Behave yourself," in her ear, and climbed onto his wagon without looking back. The sound of wheels on stone faded until only the mountain wind remained, leaving the newlyweds standing in awkward silence on their shared porch. "I'll get your trunk," Dakota said finally, his voice carefully neutral. He moved with surprising gentleness for such a large man, lifting her belongings as if they were made of spun glass. "You can have the bedroom. I'll sleep by the hearth." Ayana followed him inside, seeing her new home properly for the first time. The cabin was larger than it appeared from outside, with a main room dominated by a massive stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a hand-pumped well, and a single bedroom that had clearly been built for two people. Everything was clean but austere, functional rather than comfortable. What struck her most was how empty it felt. No photographs, no personal touches, nothing that spoke of the man who lived here, except for the cradle. It sat in the corner of the bedroom, carved from what looked like pine and polished to a honey glow. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every curve and joint fitted with the precision of someone who understood both wood and love. Ayana's breath caught as she realized this wasn't something Dakota had hurriedly built for her pregnancy. This cradle had been waiting here, gathering dust like a prayer no one remembered saying. "Your wife's?" she asked softly, running her fingers along the smooth wooden rail. Dakota's face went granite hard. "My daughter's. She never got to use it." He set down the trunk with more force than necessary. "I'll leave you to settle in." The door closed behind him with quiet finality, leaving Ayana alone with the ghost of another woman's dreams. She sank onto the bed, their bed, she supposed, though the thought made her stomach twist, and finally allowed herself to cry. Not the careful, silent tears she'd perfected over the past week, but the deep, wrenching sobs of a girl who'd lost everything she thought she knew about her life. When the tears finally stopped, she unpacked her few belongings with methodical precision. 3 dresses, 2 nightgowns, her mother's pearl hairbrush, and the leather-bound journal where she'd been recording her pregnancy symptoms. Everything else she'd owned, her books, her china dolls, her sheet music, remained in Silver Creek, declared unsuitable for mountain life by her father. Evening approached with the swiftness of high altitude, and Ayana found herself facing the awkward reality of sharing space with a stranger. Through the window, she could see Dakota splitting wood with an axe that looked like a toy in his massive hands. Each swing was precise, controlled, the kind of physical work that spoke of years spent surviving on his own terms. She attempted to cook dinner from the supplies she found in the kitchen: salt pork, beans, flour that might once have been white. Her efforts at bread resulted in something closer to hardtack, and the beans remained stubbornly tough despite prolonged boiling. When Dakota finally came inside, drawn by the smell of burning food, he found her standing over the stove with tears of frustration streaming down her face. "Here," he said quietly, taking the wooden spoon from her trembling hands. "Let me." Ayana watched in amazement as this rough mountain man transformed her culinary disasters into something edible. His movements around the kitchen were sure and practiced, the hands that wielded axe and rifle now gently coaxing flavor from simple ingredients. When he placed a bowl of properly prepared beans before her, she felt something crack in the wall she'd built around her emotions. "Thank you," she whispered. "You'll learn," he replied, settling across from her with his own bowl. "Everything takes practice up here." They ate in silence, but it felt different from the hostile quiet of the afternoon, more like two wounded animals sharing shelter than enemies forced together. When Ayana complimented the meal, Dakota's stern features softened almost imperceptibly. "My wife taught me to cook," he said, the words coming slowly, like they hurt to speak. "Said a man who couldn't feed himself was no man at all." "What was her name?" "Kachina. It means sacred dancer in Hopi." His dark eyes grew distant. She was everything good in this world." Ayana felt a pang of something that might have been jealousy. How did one compete with a memory, especially the memory of someone who died too young to disappoint? "I'm sorry for your loss." Dakota's gaze sharpened, focusing on her with sudden intensity. "Are you? Or are you just saying what you think I want to hear?" The question caught her off guard with its directness. In her father's world, conversation was all politeness and misdirection, words chosen for their effect rather than their truth. I don't know, she admitted. I don't know anything anymore. Something shifted in Dakota's expression, surprise perhaps at her honesty. That makes two of us. Over the following weeks, a tentative routine emerged. Dakota would wake before dawn and disappear into the mountains, returning at dusk with game or furs, or sometimes just the tired satisfaction of a man who'd worked hard for survival. Ayanna spent her days learning the endless tasks of frontier housekeeping, hauling water from the stream, tending the garden behind the cabin, preserving meat for winter storage. Her pregnancy progressed with textbook predictability, the morning sickness giving way to the strange energy of the second trimester. She found herself able to eat Dakota's cooking with genuine appetite, her body filling out in ways that spoke of health rather than shame. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, not desire exactly, but something warmer than the cold assessment of that first day. The breakthrough came during a summer storm that trapped them inside the cabin for 3 days. Rain lashed the windows with biblical fury, while thunder echoed off the mountain peaks like artillery. On the second day, bored beyond endurance, Ayanna discovered a wooden chess set tucked away in a corner of the main room. "Do you play?" she asked, setting up the pieces on the small table near the fire. Dakota looked up from the knife he'd been sharpening. "Been a while? My grandfather taught me. He said chess was like life. You had to think several moves ahead or you'd lose everything." They played in companionable silence, the only sounds the rain on the roof and the occasional crackle from the fireplace. Ayanna won the first game through aggressive tactics that sacrificed material for position. Dakota won the second with patient strategy that reminded her uncomfortably of her father's political maneuvering. By the third game they were talking. "You're educated," Dakota observed, moving his knight to threaten her queen, "more than most women out here." "My father believed education was important for making advantageous marriages." The bitterness in her voice surprised them both. "Ironic, considering how that worked out." "You regret marrying me?" The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Ayanna studied the chessboard, acutely aware that her answer would set the tone for whatever their relationship was to become. "I regret the circumstances," she said finally. "But not this. Not talking with you like this." Dakota's hand paused over his bishop. "I told your father I'd marry you because you looked like Kachina. That was wrong of me." "Why was it wrong?" "Because you're not her. You're—" He struggled for words, his usual articulate speech failing him. "You're yourself. And that deserves better than being someone's replacement." The simple declaration hit Ayanna with unexpected force. When had anyone ever valued her for herself rather than for what she represented or could provide? She moved her queen across the board, not for tactical advantage, but because her hands needed something to do. What was she like? Kachina? Dakota leaned back in his chair, his weathered face softening with memory. "Gentle, patient with my rough edges. She saw good in everyone, even when they couldn't see it in themselves." He paused, then added quietly, "She would have liked you." "How can you know that?" "Because you're trying to make the best of an impossible situation without taking it out on the person closest to you. That's exactly what she would have done." That night, for the first time since their wedding, Ayanna didn't cry herself to sleep. Instead, she lay in the darkness, listening to Dakota's steady breathing from the main room and wondering if something that began so wrongly could ever grow into something right. The answer came 3 weeks later when a mountain lion threatened their small garden. Ayanna was hanging laundry when she heard the growl, low and threatening, from the tree line. The great cat emerged from the shadows like a golden nightmare, its eyes fixed on her with predatory intelligence. She froze, every instinct screaming at her to run, while her rational mind reminded her that running would trigger the cat's chase response. The rifle shot cracked across the clearing like thunder, and the mountain lion crumpled instantly. Dakota emerged from the cabin at a dead run, his face white with terror as he reached Ayana's side. "Are you hurt? Did it touch you?" His hands moved over her frantically, checking for injuries with the skill of someone who understood anatomy. Only when he was satisfied that she was unharmed did he pull her against his chest, his massive frame shaking with delayed shock. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered into her hair. "I thought I'd lost another one." Standing there in her husband's arms, feeling truly safe for the first time in months, Ayana finally understood what was growing between them. It wasn't the passionate romance she'd dreamed of as a girl, but something steadier and more precious. Partnership forged in mutual respect and deepened by shared vulnerability. "You didn't lose me," she said softly. "I'm right here." When Dakota pulled back to look at her, his dark eyes held an expression she'd never seen before, something that might have been the beginning of love. The first labor pain struck Ayana during the pre-dawn hours of a sweltering August morning, ripping through her body like lightning and jerking her from restless sleep. She gripped the sheets, biting back a cry that would have woken Dakota from his bedroll by the dying fire. For weeks, she'd felt the baby moving restlessly inside her, as if sensing the approaching storm of birth. But nothing had prepared her for this. The feeling that her body was being torn apart from within. By the time the sun painted the mountain peaks gold, the pains were coming every few minutes with relentless intensity. Ayana stumbled from the bedroom, one hand pressed to her lower back, the other cradling her enormous belly. She found Dakota already awake, feeding kindling to the fire with the practiced efficiency of a man who understood the importance of warmth. "It's time," she gasped, doubling over as another contraction seized her. Dakota's transformation was instantaneous and startling. The quiet mountain man disappeared, replaced by someone who moved with medical precision and authority. He swept Ayana into his arms as if she weighed nothing, carrying her back to the bedroom where he began preparations with the kind of systematic calm that spoke of extensive training. "How do you know what to do?" Ayana panted between contractions, watching him boil water and arrange clean cloths with professional efficiency. "I wasn't always a mountain man," Dakota replied, his hands gentle as he helped her into a more comfortable position. "I studied medicine back east before everything changed." The revelation should have shocked her, but another wave of pain drove all other thoughts from her mind. For the next 8 hours, Ayana existed in a world narrowed to the space between contractions, dimly aware of Dakota's steady presence beside her. His voice guided her breathing, his hands supported her when she needed to walk. His quiet encouragement became the anchor that kept her from drowning in pain. "I can see the head," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "One more push, Ayana. Just one more." The final contraction felt like it would split her in half, but then suddenly the pressure released, and a thin, angry wail filled the cabin. Through her exhaustion, Ayana watched Dakota lift a tiny, perfect human being, slippery with birth and crying with healthy lungs. "A girl," he breathed, his weathered face transformed by wonder. "A beautiful little girl." When he placed the baby on Ayana's chest, skin to skin, the world shifted on its axis. This tiny creature, with her shock of dark hair and eyes that already seemed too wise for her newborn face, was hers. Not a burden or a shame, but a miracle that had grown from love, even if that love had been one-sided and brief. "Kaya," Ayana whispered, remembering Dakota telling her about his lost daughter. "Her name is Kaya." Dakota's hands stilled in their work of cleaning up. "Are you certain? That was your daughter's name, I know." Ayanna looked up at him, this man who had become so much more than the stranger she'd married. "I want to honor her memory. And yours." The tears that tracked down Dakota's cheeks were the first she'd ever seen him shed. When he leaned down to kiss both mother and daughter, his lips were salt-sweet with emotion. "Thank you," he whispered against her temple, "for giving me back something I thought I'd lost forever." For 3 perfect days, they existed in a bubble of new family bliss. Dakota proved as skilled at infant care as he was at everything else, showing Ayanna how to nurse, how to change the cloth diapers he'd sewn himself, how to read the different cries that meant hunger versus discomfort versus simple loneliness. Baby Kaya seemed to recognize his voice, settling into calm whenever he spoke in the low, rumbling Lakota that sounded like ancient prayers. Ayanna marveled at watching this massive, rough-hewn man handle their tiny daughter with infinite gentleness. His enormous hands could cradle her entire body, yet he touched her like she was made of butterfly wings. When he thought Ayanna was sleeping, she'd catch him standing over the cradle, whispering stories to Kaya about her mother's courage, about the mountains that would be her playground, about the love that had brought her into existence. It was during one of these tender moments that their peaceful world shattered. The horses arrived first. Ayanna heard their hooves on the rocky trail while she was nursing Kaya by the bedroom window. Then came the voices, multiple men speaking in low, urgent tones that carried the authority of official business. Through the glass she could see riders dismounting in their clearing, Judge Whitcrow, Pastor Hayes, and 3 men she didn't recognize wearing the silver badges of territorial marshals. "Dakota," she called softly, her voice tight with sudden fear. He appeared in the doorway instantly, his expression shifting from contentment to alertness as he registered the threat. "Stay here," he commanded, moving toward the front room with the silent grace of a predator. "Keep Kaya quiet," but Ayanna could hear every word through the cabin's thin walls as her father's voice boomed across the clearing. "Dakota Bearfighter, come out here. We need to talk." The front door opened and she heard her husband's boots on the porch. "Judge, gentlemen, what brings you up the mountain?" "Official business, I'm afraid." Judge Whitcrow's voice carried the oily satisfaction of a man holding winning cards. "We've received disturbing reports about your treatment of my daughter." "What kind of reports?" "That you've been holding her against her will. That the marriage was invalid from the start due to coercion." Pastor Hayes's voice joined the conversation, unctuous with false concern. "We're here to rescue the poor girl and bring her home where she belongs." Ayanna's blood ran cold. Through the window she could see more riders approaching through the trees. At least 6 more men, all armed, all wearing the same official badges. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a military operation. "My wife is here of her own free will," Dakota said, his voice deadly calm. "She's just given birth to our daughter. Moving her now could kill them both." "Our daughter?" Judge Whitcrow's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "That bastard child belongs to no one. As for my daughter's health, we brought a proper doctor to examine her." One of the strangers stepped forward, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and the pale complexion of someone who'd never done a day's manual labor. "Dr. Pembridge," he introduced himself. "I'm here to assess Mrs. Whitcrow's condition and determine if she's fit for travel." "Her name is Mrs. Bearfighter now," Dakota growled, "and she's not going anywhere." "Actually," Judge Whitcrow's voice turned silky with triumph, "she is. You see, I've done some investigating since our last meeting. Turns out that silver mine you've been so secretive about, it's worth considerably more than I initially thought. Enough to clear all my debts and fund a proper run for territorial governor." Ayana felt the world tilt sideways as understanding crashed over her. This had never been about her shame or her pregnancy or even her father's political reputation. It had been about money, Dakota's hidden wealth and her father's gambling debts. She'd been sold not as punishment for her sins, but as the key to a treasure chest her father intended to claim. The marriage was arranged under false pretenses, Judge Whitcrow continued. I never would have agreed to give my daughter to a man who'd been hiding such valuable assets. The contract is void. What contract? Dakota's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. The one that grants me legal claim to all your holdings if anything should happen to you. The one you signed when you agreed to take responsibility for damaged goods. The malice in her father's voice made Ayana's stomach turn. Of course, if you'd prefer to avoid legal complications, we could always arrange for you to have an accident up here in these dangerous mountains. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a powder keg. Through the window, Ayana could see the other riders spreading out around the cabin, cutting off escape routes with military precision. Baby Kaya stirred in her arms, making soft mewling sounds that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. You have 1 hour, Judge Whitcrow announced. Pack whatever personal belongings you want to keep, then turn over my daughter and grandchild. After that, we'll discuss the transfer of your mining claims like civilized men. And if I refuse, then we'll take them anyway, and you'll be found dead of natural causes. Mountain lions are so unpredictable this time of year. The casual way her father discussed murdering the man who'd saved her life made Ayana's vision go white with rage. This was the man who'd raised her, who'd taught her about justice and morality, who'd sent her away to preserve the family honor. All lies. Everything had been lies designed to serve his endless hunger for power and wealth. Through the bedroom window, she watched Dakota's massive frame go perfectly still on the porch. When he spoke again, his voice carried the quiet menace of distant thunder. 1 hour, he agreed. But, Judge, you should know that mountain lions aren't the only dangerous predators up here. The hour passed with agonizing slowness, each minute marked by the sound of boots circling the cabin like wolves testing their prey's defenses. Ayana sat in the bedroom, clutching baby Kaya to her chest while listening to the low murmur of voices outside. Her father's men discussing strategy, positioning themselves for what everyone knew would not end peacefully. Through the thin walls, she could hear Dakota moving through the cabin with deliberate purpose, the soft sounds of preparation that spoke of a man who understood he was about to fight for everything that mattered. When he finally came to the bedroom, his face was set in lines of grim determination that made him look older than his 32 years. In his hands, he carried the Winchester rifle and a leather gun belt that had seen considerable use. "Can you shoot?" he asked, without preamble, buckling the gun belt around his waist with practiced efficiency. "Yes," Ayana replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "My grandfather taught me before he died. Said a woman alone needed to know how to protect herself." "Good." Dakota pulled a smaller revolver from the gun belt and checked its cylinder with mechanical precision. "Because I can't protect both you and Kaya if they rush the cabin at once." The casual way he discussed the coming violence should have terrified her. But instead, Ayana felt something cold and hard crystallizing in her chest. These men had come to steal her child, to murder her husband, to destroy the first real happiness she'd ever known. Let them try. "What do you need me to do?" Dakota's dark eyes met hers, and she saw something like pride flicker in their depths. "Stay in this room with Kaya. There's a loose floorboard by the window. If things go bad, take the baby and crawl under the cabin. Follow the stream down the mountain until you reach the trading post at Miller's Crossing. Tell them what happened. I'm not leaving you. You are, if I tell you to." His voice brooked no argument. That child needs her mother more than she needs a dead father." Before Ayanna could protest further, Judge Whitcrow's voice boomed across the clearing with the authority of territorial law. "Time's up, bear fighter. Send out my daughter and grandchild, and we'll discuss your future like reasonable men." Dakota's response was to blow out the oil lamp, plunging the cabin into the gray half-light of approaching dusk. "Like hell we will," he muttered, taking position by the front window where he could watch the clearing. The attack came with sunset, brutal and coordinated. Dr. Pembridge approached the front door under a white flag, claiming he needed to examine Ayanna for travel fitness. When Dakota opened the door a crack to refuse entry, 3 men rushed the porch while others began circling toward the back of the cabin. The first gunshot shattered the mountain silence like breaking glass. Dakota's Winchester spoke twice in rapid succession, dropping 2 of the rushing men before they could breach the doorway. But the distraction allowed others to reach the cabin walls, and suddenly bullets were splintering through the wooden shutters like deadly splinters. "Stay down!" Dakota roared over the gunfire, returning shots with mechanical precision while glass exploded around him. In the bedroom, Ayanna pressed herself against the floor with Kaya cradled beneath her, the baby's terrified wails mixing with the crack of rifles and the shouts of men. Through the window she could see muzzle flashes in the gathering darkness, could smell the acrid smoke of gunpowder drifting through the shattered glass. Then she heard it, the sound that made her blood freeze. Footsteps on the roof, someone trying to come down the chimney like a nightmare version of St. Nicholas. The plan was working. They were forcing Dakota to defend multiple fronts while slowly overwhelming his position. Without conscious thought, Ayanna grabbed the revolver and moved toward the main room. If they were going to die here, she wouldn't cower in the bedroom like a helpless victim. The woman who'd been sold like cattle was gone, replaced by a mother defending her cubs. She found Dakota pressed against the front wall, blood streaming from a graze across his forehead where flying wood splinters had caught him. His ammunition was running low. She could see it in the careful way he chose his shots, the growing gaps between his return fire. "The chimney," she whispered, pointing upward. He nodded grimly, then did something that stopped her heart. He pressed his spare rifle into her hands and pointed toward the fireplace. "When he comes down, shoot first. Don't hesitate, don't warn him, just shoot." The weight of the weapon felt alien and familiar at once. Ayanna had shot at targets with her grandfather, even brought down small game during lean times. But this was different. This was pointing a gun at another human being with full intention to kill. The man who dropped down the chimney was one of the territorial marshals, his badge glinting in the firelight as he landed in a crouch with his pistol drawn. He saw Ayanna first, saw the young mother with the baby strapped to her chest, and his mouth curved in a predatory smile. "Well now, sweetheart, why don't you just—" The rifle bucked against Ayanna's shoulder, the report deafening in the enclosed space. The marshal's smile disappeared along with most of his chest, and he crumpled backward into the cold ashes with a wet thud that would haunt her dreams forever. "Good girl," Dakota said quietly, then returned to his position as more gunfire erupted outside. But their victory was short-lived. Judge Whitcrow's voice cut through the battle noise with cold authority. "Enough! Bearfighter, I have something that belongs to you." Through the shattered front window they could see torches being lit in the clearing. By their flickering light, Judge Whitcrow stood with a can of kerosene in one hand and a burning brand in the other. Behind him, his remaining men had taken cover behind trees and rocks, their rifles trained on every possible exit from the cabin. "You've got 30 seconds to come out with your hands up," the judge called. "Otherwise, I burn this place down with all of you inside. That baby will die screaming, and it'll be on your head." Ayanna felt her world collapse. Baby Kaya, innocent of everything except existing, would pay the price for adult sins. The thought of her daughter suffering because of her mother's defiance was unbearable. "Let me go to him," she whispered to Dakota. "Let me take Kaya and—" "No." His voice was iron hard, unyielding. "You know what he'll do. He'll kill the baby to eliminate witnesses, then claim you died in the fire. I won't let that happen." "Then what do we do?" Dakota's smile was terrible to see, all predator and no gentleness. "We give him what he wants, just not the way he expects it." Moving with purpose that spoke of military training, Dakota began arranging something by the front door: furniture, clothing, anything that would burn quickly and hot. When Judge Whitcro's ultimatum expired and the first splash of kerosene hit the cabin's front wall, Dakota was ready. The door exploded outward in a shower of burning debris as Dakota kicked over his improvised firebomb. Flaming wreckage scattered across the porch and into the clearing, forcing the attackers to scramble for cover, while temporarily illuminating their positions. In that moment of chaos and confusion, Dakota burst through the flames like an avenging angel, his massive frame silhouetted against the fire as he charged directly toward Judge Whitcro. His war cry, ancient Lakota words that spoke of death and vengeance, echoed off the mountain peaks as he covered the distance between cabin and trees in heartbeats. The remaining marshals, caught between the spreading fire and this human avalanche bearing down on them, broke ranks and ran. Only Judge Whitcro stood his ground, his pistol tracking Dakota's charge with the cold precision of a man who'd killed before. The two shots came almost simultaneously. Judge Whitcro's aimed and deliberate, Dakota's fired from the hip while still running. Both men staggered, both bled, but only one fell. Judge Whitcro crumpled to his knees in the pine needles, clutching his chest where Dakota's bullet had found its mark. When Dakota reached him, the older man looked up with eyes already growing dim. "You should have taken the deal," Judge Whitcro gasped. Now you'll never be safe. There are others who know about the mine." "They'll keep coming." "Let them come," Dakota replied, his own voice weak from blood loss. "I'll be ready." But as he turned back toward the burning cabin where his wife and daughter waited, Judge Whitcro's final act was to raise his pistol one last time and fire at the man who'd destroyed his dreams of power and wealth. The bullet took Dakota high in the back, spinning him around and dropping him face first into the mountain dirt just yards from where Ayanna waited in the doorway with their child. The scream that tore from Ayanna's throat echoed across the mountain peaks like the cry of a wounded animal. She watched in horror as Dakota collapsed face first into the blood-soaked pine needles, his massive frame suddenly still as death itself. Judge Whitcro's smoking pistol trembled in his failing grip before clattering to the ground beside his own spreading pool of crimson. "No, no, no," Ayanna whispered, stumbling across the clearing with baby Kaya clutched against her chest. The remaining flames from the cabin cast dancing shadows across the scene of carnage, making everything appear surreal and nightmarish. When she reached Dakota's side, she fell to her knees without caring about the sharp stones cutting through her dress. Blood was everywhere, soaking into the earth, staining his buckskin shirt, pooling beneath his still form. With trembling hands, she pressed against the exit wound in his chest, trying desperately to stem the flow while Kaya's cries pierced the mountain silence. Dakota's breathing was shallow and irregular, each exhale weaker than the last. "Stay with me," she begged, her tears falling onto his weathered face. "Please, Dakota, don't leave us. I can't do this alone." His dark eyes fluttered open, focusing on her with tremendous effort. When he tried to speak, blood bubbled from his lips, but his voice was still recognizable, still the gentle rumble that had become her anchor in an uncertain world. "Take Kaya," he whispered, his hand fumbling weakly for the leather pouch around his neck. "Mine deed, hidden in cabin floor. You're rich now, both of you." "I don't care about the mine," Ayanna sobbed. I care about you. We were supposed to grow old together, remember? You were going to teach Kaya to hunt and fish and speak Lakota." A ghost of a smile crossed Dakota's lips. "We'll teach her, from spirit world. Tell her, her father loved her more than life itself." The breath that left his body then didn't return. Ayanna felt the exact moment his spirit departed, felt the warmth begin to fade from skin that had held her so tenderly. The man who'd saved her from despair, who'd given her purpose and love and a family worth fighting for, was gone. But even in her grief, she could hear approaching horses, the sound of more riders coming up the mountain trail. Judge Whitcro's backup plan, perhaps, or curious neighbors drawn by the gunfire. Either way, she couldn't afford to be found here among the bodies with a smoking cabin and no witnesses to tell her side of the story. With strength born of desperation, Ayanna dragged herself to her feet and stumbled toward the cabin. The front wall was still smoldering, but the interior remained mostly intact. Following Dakota's earlier instructions, she found the loose floorboard near the bedroom window and pried it up with a kitchen knife. Beneath lay a leather-wrapped bundle containing the deed to what appeared to be the richest silver mine in Nevada Territory, along with maps showing its exact location and production estimates that made her gasp. The approaching hoofbeats were getting closer. Ayanna quickly gathered what supplies she could carry: ammunition, dried food, clean diapers for Kaya, and the small revolver Dakota had given her. Everything else, the cradle he'd carved with such love, the chess set where they'd shared their first real conversation, the life they'd been building together, had to be abandoned. Following the stream as Dakota had instructed, she made her way down the treacherous mountain path in darkness, guided only by starlight and the sound of running water. Baby Kaya had finally exhausted herself crying and now slept against her mother's chest, unaware that she'd been orphaned before her first week of life was complete. The journey to Miller's Crossing took 3 days of hiking through wilderness that seemed determined to kill them both. Ayanna's body, still recovering from childbirth, protested every step, but she pushed forward with the grim determination of a woman who'd already lost everything once and refused to lose it again. When mountain lions tracked them through the night, she sat with her back against a tree and Dakota's revolver in her hand, daring any predator to try claiming her child. On the morning of the 4th day, half dead from exhaustion and dehydration, she stumbled into the trading post where old Henrik Miller was splitting firewood behind his store. The Norwegian immigrant took one look at the blood-stained woman with the infant and immediately ushered them inside, asking no questions until she'd been fed and rested. When Ayanna finally told her story, Henrik's weathered face grew dark with anger. "Judge Whitcro, you say? Yeah, I know this man. He owes money to very bad people in Carson City. They came through here last week, asking about silver claims and mountain properties." The news hit Ayanna like a physical blow. Dakota had been right. There would be others coming for the mine, others who wouldn't hesitate to kill a woman and child to claim such wealth. She couldn't return to the mountain, couldn't even stay in the territory without putting Kaya at constant risk. "I need to get to California," she told Henrik, showing him the mine deed. "Can you help me sell this? I'll give you half of whatever we get." Henrik's eyes widened at the documents, but he shook his head firmly. "Keep your money, lady." "I help because it's right thing to do. But you sure you want to sell? This mine, it could make you richest woman in America. What good is money if we're dead?" Ayanna adjusted baby Kaya in her arms, feeling the weight of decisions that would shape both their futures. "I want safety more than wealth. I want my daughter to grow up without looking over her shoulder." The sale took 2 weeks to arrange through Henrik's contacts in San Francisco. Mining companies were eager to bid on proven silver deposits, and the final price, even after the trading post owner negotiated his standard commission, was enough to buy a new life anywhere in the country. But on the morning they were scheduled to depart for California, everything changed again. Ayanna was feeding Kaya on the trading post's front porch when she heard familiar hoofbeats approaching through the morning mist. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the rider, Pastor Elin Hayes, somehow having tracked them down despite all their precautions. The corrupt minister looked older than his years, his face haggard with sleepless nights, and his expensive black coat stained with trail dust. "Mrs. Bearfighter," he called, dismounting with the careful movements of a man unused to hard riding. "Or should I say, Mrs. Whitcrow? I believe we have unfinished business." Henrik emerged from the store with a shotgun in his hands, but Pastor Hayes raised empty palms in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here for violence. I'm here with a proposition that might interest the young lady." "I have nothing to say to you," Ayanna replied, her hand moving instinctively to the revolver hidden beneath her traveling cloak. "Your son destroyed my life. Your lies enabled my father's crimes." "You have no power over me now." "Ah, but that's where you're wrong." Pastor Hayes smiled with the oily satisfaction of a man holding winning cards. "You see, I've recently had a very interesting conversation with the territorial authorities about what really happened up on that mountain, about how you murdered a sitting judge and several federal marshals in cold blood." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Ayanna felt the world tilt sideways as she realized the trap that had been closing around her without her knowledge. "That's not what happened. They attacked us. We defended ourselves." "According to whom? The only witnesses are dead, except for you and me. And my testimony will be that Judge Whitcrow came to rescue his daughter from a savage who'd kidnapped and brutalized her." Pastor Hayes's smile grew wider. "Unless, of course, we can reach a more mutually beneficial arrangement." Henrik's shotgun swung toward the minister. "You get off my land now, preacher man." "Before I decide you're trespassing with bad intentions." "Easy, old man. I'm offering the lady a chance to clear her name and secure her future. All she has to do is sign over her mining claims to the church, and I'll testify that she was an innocent victim in the whole unfortunate affair." The sheer audacity of the blackmail took Ayanna's breath away. This man, whose lies had started the whole chain of events leading to Dakota's death, was now trying to profit from the carnage he'd helped create. She looked down at baby Kaya, sleeping peacefully in her arms, and felt something cold and hard crystallize in her chest. "I have a counter-proposal," she said quietly, standing up with lethal grace. "You leave now, and I don't put a bullet between your eyes for what you've done to my family." Pastor Hayes's confident expression faltered as he saw the change in her demeanor. This wasn't the frightened girl who'd been sold off to save her father's reputation. This was a woman who'd killed to protect her child and would do so again without hesitation. "You can't threaten a man of God." "God?" Ayanna's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "You wouldn't recognize God if he struck you down with lightning. You're a corrupt, lying snake who hides behind a collar while enabling monsters." She drew the revolver with smooth confidence, its barrel reflecting the morning sun like a promise of judgment. "Think carefully about your next words, Pastor, because they might be your last." For a long moment the two faced each other across the trading post's porch, the grieving mother with everything to lose and the corrupt minister with everything to hide. Finally, Pastor Hayes seemed to understand that he'd pushed too far, threatened the wrong woman at the wrong time. "This isn't over," he said, backing toward his horse. "You can't run forever. Eventually, justice will catch up with you." "Justice?" Ayanna kept the gun trained on him as he mounted up. "Justice would be you hanging from the nearest tree for what you've done. Consider yourself lucky that I'm feeling merciful today." As Pastor Hayes rode away, Disappearing into the morning mist like the nightmare he was, Ayanna felt something settle in her soul. She was done running, done hiding, done letting corrupt men dictate her fate. She had a daughter to raise and a new life to build, and she'd kill anyone who tried to take that away from her. Henrik lowered his shotgun with obvious relief. That man, he will cause more trouble. Let him try, Ayanna replied, holstering her weapon. I'm not the same frightened girl I was 6 months ago. I've learned some things about fighting back. But even as she spoke the brave words, she could feel the weight of the choice ahead. She could take the mining money and disappear into California anonymity, raising Kaya safely but always looking over her shoulder. Or she could stay and fight for the truth, risking everything but potentially securing real justice for Dakota's memory. The decision, she realized, would define not just her future, but the kind of woman she wanted her daughter to see in the mirror 20 years from now. The answer came to Ayanna as she sat rocking baby Kaya on Henrik's porch that evening, watching the Nevada sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. She couldn't run forever, couldn't build her daughter's future on a foundation of lies and fear. More importantly, she couldn't let Dakota's death go unavenged while corrupt men like Pastor Hayes continued destroying innocent lives. "Henrik," she said quietly, "I need you to send a telegram to the territorial governor. Tell him I have information about Judge Whitcro's criminal activities that could save the territory millions in fraudulent mining claims." The old Norwegian looked up from whittling a wooden toy for Kaya. "You sure about this, lady? Once you start that fight, no going back." "There's already no going back. The only choice is whether I fight or spend the rest of my life running." What Ayanna didn't know was that her decision would unleash a chain of revelations that would shake the Nevada territory to its foundation. The telegram reached Governor John Sparks within hours, and his response was immediate. He was sending his personal investigator, a former Pinkerton detective named Samuel Cross, to interview the only surviving witness to Judge Whitcro's crimes. Cross arrived 3 days later, a lean man with intelligent gray eyes who listened to Ayanna's story without interruption. When she finished, he pulled out a leather portfolio thick with documents. "Mrs. Bearfighter," he said, using her married name with deliberate respect, "you've just provided the missing piece to a puzzle we've been working on for months." Judge Whitcro wasn't just corrupt. He was the head of a criminal organization that's been defrauding the territory out of mining rights worth millions. The evidence Cross revealed was staggering. Judge Whitcro had been forging mining deeds, selling the same claims to multiple buyers, and arranging accidents for anyone who discovered his schemes. The network included Pastor Hayes, several territorial marshals, and at least 3 other judges across Nevada and California. "Your husband's mine wasn't just valuable," Cross explained, spreading maps across Henrik's kitchen table. "It was the centerpiece of Whitcro's entire operation. He'd planned to use it as collateral for loans that would have bankrupted the territorial government." But the biggest revelation was yet to come. As Cross continued his investigation, interviewing survivors and examining documents found in Judge Whitcro's burned-out office, a pattern emerged that made Ayanna's blood run cold. "Mrs. Bearfighter, I need to ask you something difficult. How much do you remember about your mother's death?" The question caught her completely off guard. "She died in childbirth, when I was born. My father told me there were complications." Cross's expression was grim. "According to medical records I've found, your mother didn't die in childbirth. She lived for 3 days afterward, long enough to write a letter to the territorial authorities reporting your father's criminal activities." The world seemed to tilt sideways as the implication hit her. "You're saying my father killed my mother?" "The doctor who attended her birth kept private notes. Your mother suspected your father was involved in illegal activities and planned to leave him. She'd discovered evidence of his mining fraud and intended to turn it over to federal authorities." Cross pulled out a faded piece of paper. This is a copy of her final letter, found hidden in the doctor's files. She names your father as the leader of a criminal conspiracy and begs the authorities to protect her infant daughter. Ayana's hands trembled as she read her mother's words. A woman she'd never known pleading from beyond the grave for someone to save her baby from the monster she'd married. The letter revealed that Judge Whitcrow had murdered his wife with an overdose of laudanum, making it appear she'd died from post-birth complications. "There's more," Cross continued gently. "Your mother wasn't just afraid for herself. She discovered that your father had been selling young women, daughters of families in debt to him, to men throughout the territory. You weren't the first daughter he'd traded away, Mrs. Bearfighter. You were just the most valuable because of your husband's mine." The revelation that her father had been trafficking women hit Ayana like a physical blow. How many other girls had suffered her fate? How many families had been destroyed by Judge Whitcrow's greed? And the scope of his evil seemed to expand with each new piece of evidence. But Cross wasn't finished. "We've found records of at least a dozen other women sold into forced marriages over the past 15 years. Most disappeared completely, probably murdered when they became inconvenient. You're the only one who survived to tell the story." As the investigation continued, more survivors emerged from the shadows. Women who'd escaped abusive marriages, families who'd lost daughters to Judge Whitcrow's schemes, minors who'd been cheated out of legitimate claims. Each testimony added another layer to the case against the corruption that had rotted the Nevada territory from within. The breakthrough came when Pastor Hayes, faced with overwhelming evidence of his complicity, decided to save himself by confessing everything. His sworn statement revealed the full scope of the criminal network and provided locations where physical evidence had been hidden. "Hayes has agreed to testify in exchange for avoiding the death penalty," Cross told Ayana as they prepared for the territorial hearings. "Your testimony, combined with his confession and the documentary evidence, should be enough to clean out this entire network." The hearings, held in Carson City over the course of 2 weeks, became the biggest news story in territorial history. Ayana took the stand wearing the black dress she'd worn to her forced wedding, baby Kaya sleeping peacefully in her arms as she recounted the events that had led to her father's death. "I shot Judge Whitcrow to protect my family," she stated clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed courtroom. "He came to our home with armed men, threatened to burn us alive, and attempted to murder my husband for money. I would do it again without hesitation." The courtroom erupted in applause, quickly gavelled down by the presiding judge. But the message was clear. The territory had heard enough about corrupt officials destroying innocent lives. When Pastor Hayes took the stand, his testimony revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. He named names, provided dates, and described in detail how Judge Whitcrow had built his criminal empire on the backs of vulnerable families. "We told ourselves we were bringing order to a lawless territory," Hayes confessed, his voice barely audible. "But we were the lawless ones. We were the monsters." The final surprise came when Chayton Hayes was arrested trying to flee to Mexico. Under interrogation, he confessed to more than just seducing Ayana. He'd been his father's primary recruiter, identifying vulnerable young women for the trafficking operation. His charm and good looks had been weapons used to destroy dozens of lives. "I never meant for it to go so far," he claimed during his testimony. "It started as harmless flirtation, but Father said we needed information about which families were desperate enough to make deals." Listening to the man who'd claimed to love her describe their relationship as a calculated business transaction, Ayana felt the last vestiges of her old, naive self finally die. She was no longer the innocent girl who'd believed in romance and happy endings. She was a woman who understood that love was something earned through actions, not words, the way Dakota had earned it through daily kindness and sacrifice. The verdicts, when they came, satisfied her need for justice. The surviving members of Judge Whitcro's network received sentences ranging from life imprisonment to death, depending on their level of involvement. More importantly, the territorial government established new laws protecting women from forced marriage and created a fund to compensate victims of the trafficking operation. Governor Sparks personally presented Ayanna with a formal pardon for any crimes committed in self-defense, along with a commendation for her courage in exposing the corruption. "You've saved countless lives by speaking the truth," he told her during the ceremony. "The territory owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid." But the greatest vindication came in the form of a letter from Dakota's old Army unit, men who'd served with him during the Civil War. They'd heard about his death and wanted her to know that he'd been the finest soldier and gentleman they'd ever known. "He saved my life at Antietam," wrote Sergeant Major William Brennan. "Always said he was going to find a good woman and raise a family in the mountains. Sounds like he got his wish, even if it was cut too short. You and your daughter are in our prayers." Standing in the Nevada sunshine outside the courthouse, holding baby Kaya while reporters shouted questions about her plans for the future, Ayanna finally understood what Dakota had tried to tell her in those final moments. The mine, the money, even the justice. None of it mattered as much as the love they'd shared and the daughter who would carry forward their combined legacy. She was rich now, richer than she'd ever imagined possible. But more importantly, she was free. Dear friends, if this story touched your heart, it's because you understand something precious that younger generations are still learning. That real love isn't found in fairy tales, but in the quiet moments when someone chooses to stay despite the storms. Ayanna's journey from a discarded girl to a woman who built her own happiness reminds us that it's never too late to start over, never too late to find the family that truly sees us. Whether you're 55 or 85, whether you've buried a spouse or raised children alone, you know that the deepest joy comes not from perfect circumstances, but from the courage to love again after loss. Dakota showed us that a man's worth isn't in his words but in his daily kindness, his willingness to protect what matters. And Ayanna proved that a woman's strength isn't in her silence but in her refusal to let others define her story. Have you found that kind of love? The kind that sees past your scars to your true worth? What would you tell a younger person about the difference between passion and partnership? Share your wisdom in the comments below. 10 years had passed since the territorial hearings that exposed Judge Whitcro's criminal empire. 10 years of building a new life from the ashes of the old. Ayanna stood on the wraparound porch of her San Francisco mansion, watching her daughter Kaya chase butterflies through the carefully tended garden that reminded her of the wildflower meadows around Dakota's mountain cabin. At 11 years old, Kaya had inherited her father's gentle strength and her mother's fierce intelligence, growing into a young lady who spoke 3 languages and could outshoot most grown men. The silver mine sale had indeed made them wealthy beyond imagination, but Ayanna had used that wealth purposefully. Half had gone into a trust for Kaya's education and future, while the other half funded the Dakota Bearfighter Foundation, a charity that helped women escape abusive situations and start new lives. The foundation had rescued more than 300 women and children over the past decade, providing them with safe housing, legal assistance, and job training that led to genuine independence. "Mama, look!" Kaya called from the garden, holding up a monarch butterfly that had landed on her outstretched finger. "It's not afraid of me." "That's because you have gentle hands," Ayanna replied, her heart swelling with the kind of pride that came from watching your child embody the best of both parents. "Your father always said wild things could sense a kind heart." They spoke of Dakota often, keeping his memory alive through stories and traditions that honored his Lakota heritage. Kaya wore the small medicine bag he'd crafted during those precious weeks after her birth, and Ayanna had taught her the prayers he'd whispered over their daughter's cradle. The wooden chess set from their mountain cabin held place of honor in the mansion's library, where mother and daughter played every evening, continuing conversations that Dakota had started about strategy, patience, and thinking several moves ahead. But it wasn't just Dakota's memory that shaped their daily lives. The house buzzed with the activity of chosen family, former victims of trafficking who'd become friends and confidants, investigators like Samuel Cross who'd become trusted advisors, and even old Henrik Miller who'd sold his trading post and moved to California to serve as the foundation's financial manager. Henrik had become the grandfather Kaya had never known, teaching her Norwegian folk songs and the art of whittling that connected her to traditions beyond her own heritage. Mrs. Bearfighter? The voice belonged to Margaret Sullivan, the Foundation's newest resident, a 20-year-old Irish immigrant who'd escaped an arranged marriage to a brutal mine foreman. The afternoon ladies are here for their meeting. Ayanna smiled, adjusting the simple blue dress she favored for Foundation work. The afternoon ladies were a group of wealthy San Francisco matrons who'd initially approached her charity work with condescending sympathy, expecting to find a grateful victim who'd properly learned her place. Instead, they'd discovered a sharp-minded businesswoman who challenged their assumptions about everything from women's suffrage to economic policy. What began as reluctant charity work had evolved into genuine friendship and mutual respect. "Tell them I'll be right in, Margaret. And remember, you don't have to call me Mrs. Bearfighter. Ayanna is fine." The young woman's eyes still held shadows of the fear that would take years to fully heal, but her smile was growing stronger every day. "Yes, ma'am. And thank you again for everything." As Margaret disappeared back into the house, Ayanna reflected on how many times she'd heard those words over the years. Thank you for the safe house. Thank you for the legal help. Thank you for believing my story when no one else would. Each expression of gratitude reminded her why she'd chosen to stay and fight rather than disappear into comfortable anonymity. The afternoon meeting focused on their latest project, a proposal to the California legislature for stronger laws protecting women's property rights in marriage. It was ambitious legislation that faced significant opposition, but Ayanna had learned that meaningful change required both patience and persistence. "The mining lobby is already organizing against us," reported Mrs. Elizabeth Hurst, whose husband's newspaper empire provided crucial public support for their causes. "They claim that giving women more property rights will destabilize the economy." "Let them claim what they want," Ayanna replied with the calm confidence that came from having faced down armed men and survived. "We have the truth on our side, and truth has a way of winning in the end. It just takes time." After the ladies departed, Ayanna and Kaya settled into their evening routine, dinner prepared together, followed by homework help, then chess by the library fireplace. It was during these quiet hours that Ayanna felt Dakota's presence most strongly, as if his spirit watched over their domestic contentment with the satisfaction of a man whose sacrifice had served its purpose. "Mama," Kaya said thoughtfully as she considered her next chess move, "Mrs. Patterson asked me today if I missed having a father. I told her I did have a father, that he just lived in my heart now instead of our house. Was that the right answer?" The question pierced Ayanna's heart with its innocent wisdom. At 11, Kaya was already grappling with concepts of loss and memory that many adults never fully understood. "That was a perfect answer, sweetheart. Your father is with us in all the ways that matter, in the values he taught us, in the love he showed us, in the courage he gave us to keep going when things get difficult. Do you think he would be proud of what we've built here?" Ayana looked around the library with its walls lined with books in multiple languages, its comfortable chairs where trauma survivors found healing through education, its chess table where strategic thinking was taught through play rather than force. She thought of the Foundation's work, of the women who'd found safety and purpose, of the political changes they were slowly but steadily achieving. "I think he'd be amazed," she said honestly. "Your father was a good man who wanted to protect the people he loved. What we've done here, helping other families stay safe, giving women the tools to protect themselves, that's exactly what he would have wanted." As bedtime approached, they performed their nightly ritual of lighting a candle for Dakota's memory and speaking a few words of gratitude for the day's blessings. It was a tradition that kept grief from becoming bitterness and loss from becoming despair. "Sleep well, little one," Ayana whispered, as she tucked Kaya into the four-poster bed that was so different from the simple mountain cabin where she'd been born. "Tomorrow, we start planning your birthday party. Will you tell the butterfly story again? About how Papa said I was like a butterfly that needed protection until I was strong enough to fly?" "Of course." Ayana settled into the bedside chair, her voice taking on the storytelling cadence that made even familiar tales feel new. Once upon a time, in a cabin high in the Nevada mountains, there lived a man who understood that the most beautiful things in life were also the most fragile. After Kaya fell asleep, Ayana returned to her own bedroom, the master suite she'd designed with windows facing east toward the mountains where her heart had first learned to heal. On the nightstand sat the walnut wedding ring Dakota had carved for her, now strung on a gold chain she wore close to her heart. She'd never remarried, despite several respectful offers from eligible widowers. Not because she couldn't love again, but because she'd learned the difference between settling for companionship and waiting for partnership. At 38, she was still young enough to dream of love, but wise enough to demand the kind of respect and understanding that Dakota had shown her. If that love came, she would welcome it. If it didn't, she had built a life rich enough in purpose and family to satisfy any heart. Standing at her bedroom window, looking out at the city lights that represented thousands of stories of struggle and triumph, Ayana whispered the same prayer she'd spoken every night for 10 years. "Thank you, my love, for showing me what I was worth. Watch over our daughter and guide her to the happiness we found together, even if it comes in a different form. And help me continue the work of protection and healing that you began with just one frightened girl and one tiny baby." The stars above San Francisco shone with the same brightness they'd shone over the Nevada mountains, connecting past and present with threads of light and memory. In the distance, she could almost hear the echo of mountain winds carrying the promise that love, real love, never truly dies but transforms into something larger than itself, something that changes the world, one rescued heart at a time.